It's hard to believe that that movie is 20 years old. You all feel old now, don't you? Yeah. It's a classic. It's an epic movie that is set in and around 160 AD, and an amazing story. Let me tell you a little bit of why I showed that clip. Here you have Maximus, the valiant but reluctant gladiator. He knows that he's meant for something much more because he's experienced something much different, and it just seems that the circumstances or fate have placed him in this place where he really doesn't want to be. Once there was a dream of being a mighty warrior and a champion of Rome for Rome and for his emperor. And now he finds himself at kind of a really critical pathway in his life, kind of a dead end where it's just day-to-day mere survival in the arena that he has been placed in. After being general of the Felix Legion and commander of the forces of the north in Germania, he finds himself as a spectacle playing to a crowd that merely what he wants to do is survive these gladiatorial games. And he's actually a bit stuck. There's no real way out for him. There doesn't appear to be any win for him. So every week, or how often they have the gladiatorial games, he comes back into the arena to fight one more person with the hope of one more victory, but it's not primarily for the win. As Proximus, his owner, has told him, to win in the arena is not to defeat your opponent primarily, though that's essential. It is to win the favor of the crowd. And if you win the favor of the crowd, you will survive. Even if you're not your true self, because he's not really gladiator, right? He's somebody other than that. But this is where he finds himself, although he's not his true self, at the end of a very difficult place. And now there's this moment in the arena once again, only it's the biggest stage of all. It's in the Colosseum in Rome. And standing before him is Emperor Commodus. And Commodus is the son of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who Commodus assassinated. And because he's power hungry and he wants to be the emperor, discovers that his dad's choice for emperor was really Maximus. And so he tries to kill Maximus, unsuccessful at that, though he wounds him, goes to Maximus's home and abuses his wife and kills her and kills his son. And Maximus stumbles onto that scene near dead, and some slave traders find him and sell him as a gladiator, that which he never dreamed that he would become. And now he faces this moment in front of Commodus. Will he show who he really is, or will he pretend that he is gladiator who he really isn't? And we saw what he does. He chooses to step forward for who he really is and declares himself to be, I am not the gladiator. I am Maximus Decimus Meridius. I am the commander of the armies of the north and general of the Felix legions. I am the husband of a murdered wife and a father of a murdered son. And I am a loyal servant to the true emperor Marcus Aurelius. And he shows himself for who he is at great risk and peels back the veneer and reveals who he really truly is. So why would I show you that clip? What would be the point of it? Well, recently I have spoken with a number of people about their marketplace and their school lives. And when they describe their current circumstances in their work, in their marketplace life or school life, they have told me about how they feel trapped in circumstances that discourage them. They've told me about how they feel unfulfilled in their work, and they're certain that a change would bring about some new hope for them. They tell me about the demands of work that are sucking the life and the joy out of them. They work with someone who they just don't seem to be able to please, or they work with people that they just don't like. They wake up each morning and they dread going to work. They work for someone who is controlling or micromanages the life right out of them. They got into their profession to make a positive difference, and now they can't see any of that. Or if it really counts for anything, they're disillusioned. They can't wait to retire as a way out. It feels like a gladiator in an arena who doesn't want to be there, who had dreams and hopes at one point, but those dreams have been dashed. So it got me thinking as I watched and rewatched the clip a few times recently that in a sense, some of us in our marketplace jobs feel like it's that kind of an arena. Kind of like Maximus. We too feel like we're reluctant marketplace gladiators. We don't really want to be there, but we can't seem to find a way out. We feel the way to survive is to play to the crowd of onlookers who expect us to perform for them and hold power over us, making evaluations about us based on how we perform, we look, we act, and how we speak. And we ask, how did I get here? This isn't what I thought. This is not what I dreamed my life would be. And then, add to this mix, if we self-identify as Jesus followers, how is it that we live in the arena when there's so much in the arena that seems to not work by Jesus' standards of fairness, justice, love, grace, and kindness? And the only way that we feel we can survive is to compromise, compartmentalize, or isolate our work life and even become someone that we don't want to be, who we really aren't, just to survive. So here's the question. How is it that we can live well in the arena as a follower of Jesus Christ? Did you know that if you work 50 years of your life, if the equivalent of all the years that you work works out to be 50 years, that you're going to spend approximately 100,000 hours in that arena? It's about a third of your life. About a third. So I think it might be worthwhile taking a little bit of time to look at what the scriptures might teach us, maybe what Jesus would model, because he lived in the arena too, right? Of what his life counted for and what he thought about when it was life in the arena for him. So these last years, we've been actually looking through that lens of all of life. What does it really mean to be a follower, a student, or an apprentice of Jesus, where we really live our lives in everyday life? Is there any difference between someone who merely self-identifies as a Christian and someone who really, really lives life every day with Jesus and somehow comes to him in daily life to direct and guide and help make decisions in all kinds of vital matters of life? Things like how we use our money, our talents, our energy, and our time. And we actually get direction from him. We follow him. We're learning from him. Or how we're going to humbly implement his teachings on morality and sexuality and addictions and relationships. To be a real follower of Jesus, where we can lovingly obey him when it comes to how we handle relationship dynamics that are inevitably going to include forgiveness and mercy. We're going to have to deal with betrayal and how to tell the truth in tough circumstances and how do we serve and so on. Is there really a difference between someone who is that kind of follower of Jesus and someone who merely says, I'm a Christian, I go to church, I read the Bible, I pray, I grew up in that environment? And this is the lens we've been trying to think through. And so for the next weeks, 3 or 4 weeks or so, I would like to journey together and think through how is it in this arena of life where we often find ourselves in a marketplace setting we don't want to be, or we find ourselves disillusioned or disappointed, or it seems like it's a dead end. And maybe we've even compromised who we are at this point, and we didn't want to do that, but it just happened in order to placate the crowd. How is it in that environment, in that arena, we actually can live as apprentices of Jesus Christ and live well in that setting? So there are a couple of questions I'd like to think through with you over these next weeks. There are 2 of them. The first one I want to deal with this morning. Does your work matter to God? I think we need to kind of set a foundation, a theological, a biblical foundation of whether our work even actually matters to God. Is it significant to him, or is it just a run-of-the-mill part of life that we do? And the second, does God matter to our work? And we'll spend the rest of the weeks looking at that particular thing in really practical ways. How does God matter? How does Jesus, being a follower of his, impact the place where he works? So, first of all, does your work matter to God? Is God even interested? Is it just a necessary evil that entered the world when Adam and Eve kind of messed stuff up? Is that how it got here? Is there purpose to the work that you do that is more than just providing resources or a method, a way to retire well? Is there anything more to it? Does God see it as something different than that? And so let's go back to the earliest place in the scriptures where work is mentioned, where it comes onto the public table, if you will, and it's considered and thought about. So let's go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. You don't even get out of the first chapter of the Bible before this idea of work is mentioned. This is what it says in verse 26, the 26th verse of the Bible. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the animals that scurry along the ground." So God makes everything. Everything is made. And the culmination of his creative enterprise is to make humans, and then he turns the keys of the whole creative enterprise over to them and says, "Now you reign. Now you do it. Now you do what I have been doing." But we have to look at what reign means. We might think that reign means, okay, hand me the keys, I've got this, don't need you, we'll take care of it. That's not actually what reign means in this case. It means to take care of it for sure. It means to take care of it on behalf of the one who owns it, however. The breakdown comes when we think we own it for ourselves. To reign is to join God in taking care of it. To have a sense of healthy shared ownership is what reign means. To take care of the fish, the birds, the domesticated and wild animals, even those on the ground, those scurrying little bugs and beetles. Yeah. The point is, all of that takes work. All of it does. So right out of the chute, God creates something out of nothing, and he does it without the help of anyone. And then he creates someone who did nothing, and God says to that someone who did nothing, "Come and take care of what I have made." That is what you get to do. What a privilege. It's going to become known as work. But that's what work is. It isn't actually just drawing a wage. It isn't just doing a skill. It isn't doing that it is all that. But you know what it is? It's you and I doing something creative, just like I did when I created the world. We're going to do it together now. We're going to do something of incredible worth, of incredible value. Whatever it is that you do, whatever you put your hands to, not even your job, just everything you put your hands to. The idea is now, it is a sacred, holy, wonderful, magnificent thing you do with dignity, but we do it together or it's going to lose its dignity. We do it together. Now God says, I'll always be part of this creative universe and part of creating and you'll join me in it. In the second chapter of Genesis, we read this: "So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was complete." He's done. And then on the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. There's the word. And he rested from all of his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all of his work of creation. Now you have to understand here for just a second, God is not tuckered out. He is not in need of a day off or a siesta or a mental health day. Not in need of it. He has not been tired out by this enterprise one little bit. Not at all. Rather, the idea here is that he is going to stand back, intentionally stop creating for a period of time, so that he can enjoy and look at all that he has created and be delighted in it and admire it. And in a way, what he's doing is he's honoring what his hands have created. It isn't just that he's just stepping back. It's that he's actually disciplining himself, if you think of it that way, to not create for a while, but to honor what has been created by stepping back and honoring that. It's called a Sabbath. So, sidebar, if you find yourself in a job and a career that you just can't stop, maybe because you love it so much, but it's kind of overtaken your world and your life, nobody needs a Sabbath more than you do. Not just to get a rest. I mean, that's good. but to actually honor what God has let you do with him. To stand back for a day, if you will, and observe and delight, enjoy, and worship him for what he and you have done together. But if you never stop to reflect, you just plow forward in it and you miss what the Sabbath is all about. That's not all it is, but that is part of what a Sabbath is. It goes on in verse 4. This is the account of creation of the heavens and the earth. When the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, neither wild animals nor grains were growing on the earth, for the Lord had not yet sent rain to water the earth, and there were no people to cultivate the soil. I guess he did it. Instead, springs came up from the ground and watered all the land. Then the Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person. Then the Lord planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he placed the man that he had made. And the Lord God made all sorts of trees grow up from the ground, trees that were beautiful, and they produced delicious fruit. Jump down a few verses. The Lord placed the man in the Garden of Eden to what? To work, to tend and watch over it, to reign over it. So the Lord God formed from the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would call them, and the man chose a name for each. He gave the names to all the livestock, all the birds of the sky, and all the wild animals. So in general terms, you could look at this. There is a general pattern of work that God has himself, a creative pattern of work. He invites us to join in with him. And the first thing that he does in paradise, where everything's cool, he gets us working alongside of him to do this creative enterprise that he's doing. And then he gives Adam and Eve a specific task to do. Not just the general thing, but a specific task to do. What they are supposed to do is they're supposed to name the animals. By the way, if you want to ask a really interesting question in your life group this next week, what did Adam and Eve work at, do you think? Like, what was their day-to-day activity like? What did they Well, they didn't have to fix sprinklers. They didn't have to weed the front yard. Did they trim trees? Did they have to trim? Did they have to cut grass? They probably were vegetarians, right? They didn't go killing animals to eat. So maybe they spent several days just chopping up vegetables for dinner. What did they do? It's a fascinating, we actually don't have an answer for it. And it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So you can just think about that as a life group, have a good discussion around it. But what they do is they do name the animals. And how long did that take? How did they keep the names straight? How did Adam remember that, oh yeah, that's the aardvark. Oh yeah, I remember that. How many species were they? Did they have a deadline? See, all of that were left to conjecture, but they were given a specific assignment as part of their work. The earliest views of work see human beings working as God does. In fact, alongside God in paradise. Humans connected to the divine by working at something together that is both amazingly creative and sublimely spectacular. And here's the thing. It's human and divine working alongside each other that makes it truly so amazing. Have you ever thought about your work that way? That it is you and God working together at something sublime. It's what it's intended to be. Here's the thing, God could have perpetually given us what we did not work to create. It could have just kept that creation thing going that we had nothing to do with and just given it all to us. Instead, he invites us to do the work that he could have done himself. Imagine this for just a second. You decide to go camping up on the rim, and nighttime lows are such that you're going to have to build a fire to keep warm and to cook with, and you decide that you're going to take your 9 or 10-year-old son or daughter with you and give them a wonderful camping experience with you. So as you're heading up to the rim, you turn to your 9 or 10-year-old son or daughter and you say, okay, so when we get there, first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a fire. We'll go get some dry wood and we'll stack it up and we'll light it, but I want you to know it's your responsibility the rest of the weekend to keep the fire going. You're going to have to go get wood. You're going to have to stack it up just right and keep it going because we need the fire to keep going. And that's your job. And your son or daughter look at that and go, that really sucks. That sounds like work. Sounds like work. Well, it is, I guess, in a sense. But here's the thing. You know yourself who's better qualified to get the wood and keep the fire going. It's you. You could do it much better. They're not going to do it exactly right. The fire might even go down, might even go out, and they're going to have to figure but here's the point with it. You're doing something together. And that's the whole delight of the thing. It's doing something together. Your child will look at it as work possibly, but you don't. You work at it see it as an investment in the relationship that we're doing something together. The work that you and I do, whether it's a job, whether we're retired, whether it's school. Do you know why, from God's perspective, that's happening? Because he wants to add value to this world by doing it together with you. And so anytime you and I do our own thing and we think it's for ourselves and it's our thing, we're missing out the opportunity to do our thing together. And this is in large part why he gives that. Do we provide an income for our family? Is it fulfilling? Hopefully. Is it not fulfilling? Yes, sometimes. Is it disappointing? Does it feel like a dead end? But something never changes. It is a place, it's an environment, it's where God has put and allowed you to be because he wants to do this together with you. And in it, you see the wonder of a good and great and faithful Creator. Did you know that among the great faiths and belief systems in the world, the creation narrative of Genesis is entirely unique from any of the others? Any of the others. There's no story of the origin of earth that tells the story of a divine and the human doing something together for the benefit of each other. Ours is the only story that does that. Ancient Babylonians, for example, their creation story is that god Marduk overpowered goddess Tiamat, and in her demise, in the remains that were left, he formed the earth and what it was. And then out of the clay that he formed from her remains, he created human beings, but he created those human beings to serve his fickle needs. That's the dream. Want to sign up for that one? No, we don't. The Greek accounts suggest that originally the gods and the humans lived together in paradise and neither one of them worked. That sounds kind of ideal. Now, you see, the earth simply provided food in abundance, but however, in time, we got competitive with the gods and gods with us, and ultimately they won out over the deal and we became their servants. That's the Greek story. And now we serve their needs. Well, our story is so different from that. So profoundly wonderful. Here is the divine that makes everything out of love. And the pinnacle of his creation, us. He says, let's do this together. You and I together. I'll be the bigger partner because I'm God, you're not. But together, we will create amazing, amazing life and an amazing world together. In fact, I created it. I'm turning the keys over to you. Let's do this together. It's an amazing story. But the unthinkable happened. I mean, really, the unthinkable. The two human beings that had been created decided they wanted a different deal. They didn't actually want to do it with God. They thought, no, we got the keys to the Cadillac. Let's go enjoy the Cadillac ourselves. And they kind of did it on their own, and we know what happened. Things went very, very bad. Really bad. Sin for the first time. Sin is independent living of God. It's not sinful action. It's independent living of God. Never before had the earth seen something like this. And the whole thing kind of collapses and crashes in on itself, which it happens every time that we live independent of God. The next thousands of years, work became redefined as something that we did for ourselves, to sustain ourselves, to feed ourselves, to look after ourselves, to take care of ourselves. Prior to living independent, that was a notion that had never been considered. But now it was the only consideration in the human mind. This is about me, and this is what I get from it. This is how I function. And God consistently got pushed to the side, and he wasn't part of the deal as a whole. But God rectifies that. He sends himself into the world in the form of Jesus Christ. And it's so interesting to me that when Jesus comes into the world, he doesn't come in as a king or a master or a boss or that kind of, he comes in as a carpenter, creating things for people. Isn't that interesting? That he wants to do this whole creative story all over again. And he works at it. He works. He works at being a carpenter, and he works at being a healer, and he works at being a freedom giver, and he works at being a teacher. But it's all together. He says, I can only do what I see my Father doing. He's doing it. He's showing us again, do it with the Father. Do it there. And great things will come from it. And in the weeks ahead, we're going to look specifically at what did Jesus do that we could learn from that would affect how we do work. But let me say this, for the next 400 years after Jesus arrives on planet Earth, there's over those 400 years, a profound shift in how humans thought about work. Around 400 AD, Emperor Constantine came to power, and he proclaimed that Christianity would now be the national religion, the world religion. And everybody had to follow the Christian virtues and values. Do you know that there's never been a recorded incident in all of human history where Christianity has imposed its values on people and it's gone well? Never a story of that. It's when we have taken in the presence and with God that servant role and found great value in some of the most menial, difficult, challenging, apparently dead-end roles, but empowered by God, that it's actually shifted the world and shifted our history. But here's what happened. People began to not value their work, and they valued themselves and valued themselves based on the type of work they did. This is how jacked up this whole thing got. That over those early years, work got defined in two different categories. One was spiritual work, and the other was temporal work. That's what they called it. Spiritual work was anything that God was directly involved in. Temporal work was anything other than God being directly involved. So what happened is, over the next 1,100 years from there, the work that was most valued and had dignity, and God was obviously a part of it, was work of priests and monks and nuns and bishops and kings, because they did spiritual work. Everybody else, the farmers, the carpenters, the soap makers, the doctors, the fishermen, the butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, they were just there to serve the religious, spiritual workers. Can you see how messed up that would be? And work took on a different definition. If you were in the spiritual work category, you had dignity and you had value. If not, you didn't have dignity, and your value was in serving those folks over there. And then around the early 1500s, a young Catholic priest named Martin Luther discovered and put his entire life at risk over this idea that salvation is by a gift, a gracious gift of God, not through works. It's through faith in him, that the church does not dispense salvation. Doesn't. And he got in a lot of trouble for it, didn't he? What you often don't know is there was something else that got him in deep trouble. Some would say actually in more trouble than that statement of salvation by grace and faith. It was this. He pulled out 1 Peter 2:15, and he recited this to his religious leaders. In 1 Peter 2:9, it says, but you are not like that, i.e., independent, and you are not a hierarchy. For you, he's speaking to the average person now, you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, all of you are. A holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. And what Martin Luther got into so much trouble for was his correct biblical view that not only does all work have dignity and value, just as every person does, but all work. All work. There is no spiritual and temporal difference. It's all spiritual work, it turns out, because God wants to be involved in all of it. And so that makes it all spiritual. And it all has dignity, whatever it would be. I feel so strongly about this personally. You see, before I started working as a pastor in my home church, I worked in the marketplace for 12 years. Over those 12 years, I had a variety of leadership management positions, and moved from place to place. And toward the end of my marketplace career, we moved to a new city. And one of the first things that was our pattern to do as a family was to find a local church in our community to be part of it, because we have always valued the local church and just the fact that it's the hope of the whole world and Jesus expresses himself through it. And so just committing to a local church family was high priority for us. So the first weekend that we're in this new community, we find this church to be part of. We walk in with our 3 kids and sit in the back row, and after the gathering, I meet the pastor of the church, and we just became friends. Somehow the chemistry just worked, and we would hang out for lunch together, golf together, that kind of thing. And after several months, maybe a year or so, he came to me one day and he said, "I want to go for lunch with you. I have a question I want to ask you." We had lunch together. He sits down and he says, "So our church family is looking to hire a pastor." And I had that inner sinking feeling. I knew what he was going to ask. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew, and then he did. He turned to me and he said, "Brad, I'd like you to consider this. Would you leave your career and do something really important with your life and come and be a pastor on staff?" And I came unglued with him. I said, "Are you kidding me? Who would ever want to do something like that? That's a dead-end deal, man. I love being a businessman. I love doing the deals. I love the intensity of it. I love the risk of it. I love the entrepreneurial side of things, creating and making something. I've never seen a pastor like that before. They're all soft and easygoing, and they have the right verse at the right time and say these beautiful, picturesque, humble, gentle prayers. I don't want to be like that. I want to be the business guy. And besides, what I do, you tell me to do something important with my life, it's way more important than what you do. You just stand behind a podium a couple of hours every weekend and spend the rest of the week hanging out with Christian people." I actually love my employees, and I do life alongside them, and I care for them, and I'm involved in their families. And occasionally, they'll let me pray for them. I pray for them all the time, but occasionally they'll let me pray for them. And I just think Jesus is having an impact through my life and their world. And I cannot, for the life of me, I will do whatever Jesus asks me to do because he has my life. That's not a question. I'm not opposed in that sense. I just can't figure it out why I would take a step down and become a pastor. Well, eventually I must have said yes, huh? But that led to some amazing conversations between my friend and myself. I believe this with all of my being. There is no spiritual, temporal category. All that we do, whether we're retired, whether we're washing dishes as a part-time job as a student, whether we are a CEO or we're a stay-at-home mom or dad looking after our kids and family, whether we're a teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, a nuclear scientist, whatever we are, it's all matters to God. Every part of it is holy and wonderful, and he just wants to join us. He wants to join us to do something great. So does that mean it's never unfulfilling, that it's it isn't, we don't work with difficult people, and sometimes we get ourselves into situations that we go, "Oh man, how did I ever get here?" No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that even when it feels unfulfilling, it isn't. That when it looks like a dead end, it isn't. It doesn't mean we don't change and we don't look and we don't grow and do other things. Sure we do. But the point is, God sees our work as enormous value, just like we are. And he simply wants to join us in it and with us in it and bring value and dignity to it. We'll never find without him. We just won't find without him. So, first question. Does your work matter to God? Oh, how I pray that we would look again, look afresh at what we do, what we've given our lives to. It's not just your job, right? It's what you give your life to, your hands, put your hands to. What if this week we would start to go, okay, so I'm headed out the door. I'm going off to school because that's my work right now. I'm retired. I've got this career, whatever it would be. And Jesus, before I walk out the door, I'm telling you, I want to invite you to do this with me today. Yes, I don't care that much for the people I work for. I have a demanding boss. I can't figure out how to get everything done. It's a difficult environment. It doesn't feel like this is where I want to be. But Jesus, will you come join me in that? Because I want to do this with you today. I got a feeling that you might actually bring some purpose. You might actually change my view to my boss and fellow employees. You might bring a sense of fulfillment and delight and destiny in this just by inviting you into it. This is God's view of work. Over the next weeks, we're going to look at that second question. Does God matter to my work? And we'll look at things like how does being an apprentice of Jesus affect how I do my work? How does this relationship with him affect the pace with which I do my work? How does it affect the way that we relate to fellow employees and our employer when we don't like or respect them all that much? How does the fact that I don't like my work and it feels so unfulfilling play into this? The scriptures tell us that whatever we do to the honor and the fame of our King Jesus. And the wonderful thing is we don't do that on our own. We're not left to figure it out. Invited in, he comes alongside of us and he walks through our work together with us. Is that good news or what? You bet it is. So now, Jesus, thank you for your commitment and your love to us. Thanks for giving us work. Not just jobs, but something creative that we can put our hands to, even if it doesn't feel all that creative. Thank you for giving us roles and responsibilities and things that we can be a part of, that you want to be with us in. And so we invite you into our work, which isn't our work, it's like our work, you and us together. And I pray this, Jesus, for those of us that when we hear this, we go like, you have no idea how unfulfilling my work is. You have no idea how challenging and difficult it is to be where I am right now. You have no idea how disappointed I am with retirement. You have no idea how I picked a major at college and it's just not what I want. But Jesus, you do know. And tomorrow as we face that day, we invite you to be part of it with us. Give it value. Give it dignity, just like we have value and dignity to you. And we'll be ever so grateful, Jesus.